Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm running late. I'm doing an Instagram Live with Charlie Sykes. I'm a big fan of Charlie's. He is co-founder and editor at large at The Bulwark, host of the Bulwark podcast, author of the Morning Shots newsletter, and an MSNBC contributor. Hi, everybody. Hi, great to see you all. I'm going to give you a minute to join. But I'm talking to Charlie Sykes about our increasingly insane political situation in this country and really about the latest news about how former President Trump is really actually further ahead than he has ever been and what we all need to know about what's going on. So let me just find Charlie real quick, you guys. Here he is. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, good to be with you.
So nice to see you. I'm such a fan of yours, and I've really enjoyed reading the Bulwark and your newsletter almost as much as I enjoy reading my newsletter every morning. But let's talk about what's happening in politics. Where do we begin? I think we should begin with this New York Times Siena College poll released today that revealed that former President Donald Trump is dominating his rivals for the Republican presidential nomination, leading his nearest challenger, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, by a landslide 37 percentage points nationally among likely Republican voters. Your reaction?
Well, I was just reading an article about it with the headline, The Doom Poll, because it's a pretty good indication that I think you have to be somewhere between naive and delusional not to think that Donald Trump is going to win the Republican nomination. And I mean, just get your head around the fact that he has been indicted twice, faces 2 more indictments. I don't think there's any question about his character or his judgment or the way he behaves. And yet he's got this iron grip on the Republican Party. And the poll has so many interesting numbers in it, including just the extent to which Republican voters live in an alternative reality universe. They don't think that he did anything wrong. They don't have any objections to his attempt to overturn the election. And I think it's something like, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but something like 22% of people who believe that he committed serious crimes are going to vote for him anyway. I mean, think about that.
How do you explain that? I mean, Charlie, how do you explain that so many Republican voters are not fazed by what is clearly criminal activity or seemingly criminal activity? And people are saying they don't understand it either. And, you know, I'm not sure, Charlie, you can explain it, but do you want to try?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. I mean, one is the alternative reality, silos that we live in. But this is what you'd expect from a cult, right? Where whatever the cult leader does is accepted. And after 7 years of rationalizing and defending and enabling Donald Trump, we get to this point where people go, I don't care if he's a criminal, he's our criminal. The other side is so evil, is so dangerous, that we're going to support him no matter what. And the other factor is that, frankly, you have people like Ron DeSantis and others who are running against him who are not willing to, speak truth to the Republican base. Say, look, this man has violated the law. He has put men and women in the armed services at risk. He has supported, an attempted insurrection against the United States government. Instead, they're mealy-mouthed about it, or, they engage in a lot of whataboutism. But after 7 years of none of the thought leaders of the right, really not, obviously some of them, but, the vast majority of thought leaders of the right, not really leading on this particular issue, this is where you get at a certain point. There's been a lot of cowardice. There's been a lot of people who just, kept their heads down. It's transactional. They get what they want from Donald Trump. But it is an extraordinary moment because every single day, I don't know whether you do this, but if you go on Truth Social, you see an old man screaming at the clouds in all caps with the most deranged insults and conspiracy theories. And there are millions of Americans that look at that and go, yeah, we're okay with that. We're going to put him back into the Oval Office. It is amazing.
And I think people should understand your background. I mean, we're a pretty hardcore Republican, a conservative thought leader. I mean, you've been a longtime conservative voice. And so you did take a stand and say, this is not for
Right.
me. Sorry, my daughter's cat I just wanted to make sure it wasn't scratching the furniture. But so many people haven't. What caused you to make a break with your former party?
Well, and I've told this story before. It wasn't actually hard at all. I mean, I looked around and I thought, you cannot be serious. I mean, Donald Trump is unfit by, any possible measure to be the president of the United States. And so in many ways, it was this soul-crushing experience of watching other conservatives and Republicans go along with all of this, including people who I knew understood who he was. I mean, at one time, I was very good friends with Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and he was under no illusions who Donald Trump was, and yet, like so many other Republicans, he decided to make that Faustian bargain, and I just wasn't willing to do that. And so it's been a profoundly disillusioning experience. I mean, I've said this before, but Donald Trump is Donald Trump. I mean, he is this, billionaire, narcissist, chronic liar, and he is, he's played out exactly the way you'd expect. The really shocking thing has been watching all of the other Republicans go along with him and saying, we find this acceptable. And it gets worse all the time, leads us to today. I mean, today is kind of a logical endpoint to all of the surrenders, all of the things that they've been willing to swallow ever since he came down that golden escalator, ever since the Access Hollywood videotape, and they said, yeah, we're still going to support him. Once you've carved off that many slices of your soul, I guess it becomes very hard to back away.
Well, let's talk about some of the other candidates in the Republican field. Really, the only person who is speaking against Donald Trump is Chris Christie. Will Hurd, I guess, spoke against him in Iowa and got booed. So, where do we start? Let me first ask you, and well, tell me about that. I mean, what are the other Republican candidates thinking? Are they making a Faustian deal as well, thinking we cannot lose that many Republicans who are really Donald Trump's base?
I think part of it's that. I mean, some of them, I'm wondering whether they're actually running for president or whether they want to be vice president. Because generally when you run against somebody, you run against somebody. So I think some of them are just auditioning to, for the number 2 slot. I think a lot of them are afraid that they just cannot antagonize that MAGA base. And then you have Ron DeSantis, who thinks that he's going to compete with the hardcore Trump base. The problem with the hardcore Trump base is they're hardcore Trump base. They're never going to move off Donald Trump. It's about 35% of the Republican electorate that is not going to vote for anybody else. And so
it's not about ideology. It's about personality.
Oh, yes. It's about attitude. It's about hating the right people. And I think this was one of the big mistakes that Ron DeSantis made. He actually thought it was about ideology. He thought it was about policies and ideas, when it's really about entertainment. It is about attitude. It's about your willingness to fight for the sake of fighting. So you have this, and there's also a lot of, quite frankly, Katie, there's a lot of magical thinking, which is that, something unicorn, maybe he'll die. That we don't have to attack him. Maybe something is going to happen and the skies will open, some meteor will come and take Donald Trump out. Because none of them seem to have a real strategy for beating him, which leads us to these 3 other guys. Chris Christie, Will Hurd, and Asa Hutchinson. None of them are going to win this nomination. None of them are going to be president. But I have to say that what they're doing is important because they are voices from within the House. They're willing to go to Republican events. Like Will Hurd went to that Iowa Lincoln Day dinner. Asa Hutchinson went to Turning Point USA. Chris Christie is going to be on that debate stage. And they're willing to tell Republican voters what is at stake. Not just that Donald Trump is a loser. I mean, they're making that point. But more fundamentally, that he is somebody who does not put the country first, somebody who has violated the law, somebody who cannot be trusted. And so I think it's important, it's valuable. Like, I have a lot of problems with Chris Christie. I go way back on all of this. I mean, the role he played in helping Trump was, I have a real hard time getting over it. On the other hand, he's doing something valuable right now that at least I mean, how do we penetrate into that alternative reality silo? It's not going to be NPR and the New York Times and
Yeah.
MSNBC or us. It's got to have to be somebody from within that Republican Party who is willing to say these blunt things.
But is that having any impact? I seem to have read recently about a poll that said Trump's troubles was starting to erode some of his support among some Republicans. I couldn't find it when I was preparing for this interview, but you know, to what end are they having any impact, and are any Republicans being dissuaded from their loyalty to Donald Trump?
Well, we started off with a poll that would suggest that no, they're not having a lot of traction. But the question is, okay, what is the metric? How many Republicans do they need to have to peel off? How many independents are watching what's going on here? I mean, we are focusing on the minority of a minority. We are focusing on this Republican Trumpist base. But general elections are not decided by just the base. They're decided by a lot of disaffected voters. And so, you know, I do think that they, look, if Chris Christie, you know, were to peel off 3% of the vote in key states from Donald Trump, that could be decisive in a presidential election. So no, they're not going to get. They're not going to.
But he's not going to be the nominee, though. I mean, but
no.
So,
but making
so what
the
do you?
case,
I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is that he's speaking to voters who I think will be the swing voters.
Oh, so in other words, if they sit on their hands and don't support Trump, but obviously that's what you're talking about, peeling votes away from Trump.
Right. No, I mean, exactly. Not as a third party candidate, but keeping the drum beat up. You know, saying things like, well, and again, Chris Christie is, you know, he's all out of bleeps to give. And so he's very bluntly going after, you know, what a fraud Donald Trump is. And he's saying it in terms that nobody else said. I mean, going back to 2016, it was only, you know, after it was too late that you had people say, you know, this is a disaster. And then a lot of these people fell into line. So again, Chris Christie is not going to be on the ballot, and he's not going to beat Donald Trump. But he's at least providing this counter voice. And then may also, and again, now this is wish casting on my part, maybe create a permission structure for others to be more critical, maybe opening the door for Nikki Haley to be a little bit more critical. And again, I don't think there's any way to stop Donald Trump at this point, but you go into that general election and you have somebody who has been indicted, perhaps convicted of felonies, and you have voices that at one time were trusted by Republican voters speaking out against him. Again, on the margins, it might make a difference.
I mean, I think even people listening to this and hearing that he may be convicted of felonies and he's still the Republican frontrunner and could possibly be elected president of the United States again in 2024. I'm going to quote somebody who wrote something for CNN, a guy named Harry Enton. He was formerly a senior political writer and analyst at 538. Listen to this, Charlie. Trump is not only in a historically strong position for a non-incumbent to win the Republican nomination, but he is in a better position to win the general election than at any point during the 2020 cycle and almost at any point during the 2016 cycle. Now, given what has transpired and what is still likely to transpire, I think people listening to this are like, WTF? How can this be the case?
Well, I wake up every morning thinking that. And also, I just almost every morning I want to, you know, remind people, you are not the ones that took the crazy pills. You are not the crazy ones. But this is a reality. And I think that there is a certain complacency where people say, well, you know, the Republicans are losing or they'll destroy themselves. Not necessarily. And I think that that's why people ought to be very alarmed. I think they ought to be very, very engaged in all of this. And they shouldn't be in denial about the real danger of what a second Trump term would be like. Because a second Trump term, I think, would be exponentially worse than the first one, because now he's figured out where, you know, where the doorknobs are, how to open the doors, where the buttons are. He would surround himself with the most deplorable imaginable characters. I mean, as bad as Trump 1.0 was, there were, in fact, serious people and grown-ups who did, hold him back on some of the more extreme things. He's not going to make that mistake again. He's going to surround himself with the most pliable possible yes men. And he's made no secret of what he would do. I am your
there have been
retribution.
some pretty, I'd love you to elaborate on that, because
Yeah.
there's been some pretty scary reporting
Yeah.
about some of the strategy or plans for a second Trump term. Can you talk about that? Because I want to make sure people know about this.
Well, I mean, again, it's not just the reporting. He has said it. I mean, Donald Trump has made no secret of his plans. When he says, I am your retribution, that he will use the power of the federal government to go after his political opponents. He will strip the Department of Justice and the FBI of their independence. He would weaponize the IRS. He's talked openly about dismantling the intelligence apparatus of the United States. He makes no secret about it. He's also quite serious, I think, about using the power, and I think this would be unconstitutional, but basically going after the deep state by firing thousands of civil service employees and trying to replace them with political loyalists. Donald Trump wants to make the federal government an instrument of his own personal political ambition. And you don't have to believe me, just listen to what he has said. And people should not be shocked. And he's got people around him, like the people at the Heritage Foundation, who are willing to support him and come up with arguments why the president should have total control over the government. So what's ironic is right now he's talking about the Biden administration weaponizing the Department of Justice, which it's not. But this is very much from Trump's playbook. He's projecting because he intends to do that. And nobody should be on any illusions or expect that Republicans in Congress will act as a bulwark against what he's going to do. That's the other thing. Don't be so confident. You may not have you may hate Mitch McConnell right now, but you're going to miss him when he's gone if, in fact, you have a Trump presidency again.
I just want to read the opening paragraph to a New York Times piece from July 17th that says Trump and allies forge plans to increase presidential power in 2025. Donald J. Trump and his allies are planning a sweeping expansion of presidential power over the machinery of government if voters return him to the White House, reshaping the structure of the executive branch to concentrate far greater authority directly in his hands. It reminds me a little bit of what's going on in Israel right now.
Well, again, this is why I think people ought to be concerned, because what you see in authoritarian leaders around the world is they're looking at one another and they're taking their cues from one another. And again, I'm not telling you or your listeners anything they don't know, but Donald Trump is not subtle about the people he admires, the kinds of leaders that he admires. Not just Vladimir Putin, but also people like Erdogan in Turkey and Orban in Hungary and Netanyahu in Israel. And all of them are really sort of testing the limits of how much they can expand their own power. And the first thing they do, of course, is to go after the checks and the balances, the independent institutions in their society. And that New York Times story, I think, does not overstate what Trump is talking about doing. If you read a lot of the right-wing Trumpist media, you'll see that they are working on this. Steve Bannon already, openly talks about, having this army ready to hit the beachhead on January 21st, 2025. So this is all very, very real. And I think that Democrats need to be very, very conscious of this and not go back to that 2016 cockiness that, Donald Trump's the nominee. There's no way that he will be elected. We don't have to take these swing states quite as seriously. That would be a huge mistake this time around.
You say people shouldn't be in a state of denial, but I'm sure a lot of people watching this, 780 people right now, are wondering, well, what the heck are we supposed to do about this? I think, if this individual represents an existential threat to our democracy, what can people do? Clearly, this base and these supporters. And I'd love to hear from some of Trump's supporters if they want to explain in our question section why they still support President Trump. Please have at it. But what can the average person do? It's pretty unsettling, Charlie.
Well, it is unsettling, and I live in one of the states that will decide the outcome. I live in Wisconsin, and and if you live in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, I would say Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, it's going to be on your shoulders. These states could be decided by 10,000 votes or less, and that will decide who wins the electoral college. So I would certainly become engaged. Everybody has a different role to play in all of this. I give a lot of thought to your question, because for the last 7 years, I've written about Donald Trump. I've pushed back against Trump, and you look at that poll you started with, and you realize, okay, well, this is not working in the Republican Party. What can we do? But also, I think people need to understand that the center of power in the Republican Party has changed. For years, Republicans were the party of big business, and finances were determined by what the business community would support. That's no longer the case right now. Right now, if you're in Republican politics, it is the small donors that really will determine whether or not you are viable. And so you're seeing, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene rise to be superstars, because no matter how outrageous they are, they can count on, retirees from Georgia, sending them $5 or $10. But to your point, I think the business community ought to be alarmed by this. They ought to be alarmed particularly because what will it do to America's status in the world? We don't live on an island. And Donald Trump, one of the things, the most dangerous things he does, you and I have been talking about his domestic agenda. He would also have an international agenda that would isolate the United States and would alienate this country from many of our most important allies and trading partners.
And perhaps cozy up to people who are really dangerous.
Right. Exactly. And we've seen the damage that he could perhaps do in terms of trade. And yes, his fascination with the Vladimir Putins of the world, or the President Xi's of the world, ought to be very, very alarming. But again, don't expect that the United States would have the same relationship with many of our trading partners under a Trump presidency.
You talk about money. And by the way, everyone, if you're just joining us, I'm having a great conversation with Charlie Sykes, who is the co-founder and editor at large of The Bulwark. And I highly recommend his Morning Shots newsletter, just because it's interesting to get Charlie's perspective. And you have a great team of writers on your newsletter. You talked about small dollars, but I wanted to ask you about this Washington Post article that showed that Trump's PAC, Save America, has spent more than $40 million on legal costs this year for Trump and others involved in the investigations. A lot of people asked on social, how is Trump able to use money donated to his campaign for his legal defense?
Well, I think it's probably technically legal to do this, but this is a fascinating story. The way in which his political action committee has become a slush fund and a hush fund, paying off, using it for lawyers who obviously will have influence on people who will testify in these cases. But I just find it really interesting that here is, and again, it goes to the heart of Trumpism, that where did that money come from? That money came from small donors. That came from working class people. That came from cops and firefighters and retirees who watch Fox News. And he takes that money and uses it to pay lawyers to defend himself and his cronies. Remember, he's allegedly a billionaire. He's a guy that flies around on his own jet, but he won't pay for his own lawyers.
But how can that be legal? I guess, Charlie, I mean, maybe this is naive, but how can that be legal?
Well, yeah, okay, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to play one here. I've heard people say that this has been going on for some time, but it certainly pushes the limits. And I would certainly be interested in a legal challenge of this, but also his long-standing practice of misleading and leeching money out of his own supporters. No one has more contempt for his own supporters than Donald Trump. I mean, this is the thing, is that he will tell them, oh, send me money and I will fight the stolen election, and then not do it. This may, by the way, be one of the charges that Jack Smith brings. This was a key finding from the January 6th committee, the way in which he misled donors to give him money. Now, there are charges that can be brought under wire fraud, raising money under false pretenses. But I think the fact that he spent $40 million, that was the #1 expense of his political action committee, is a real tell. And I don't know whether the grandmas and the grandpas that are, sending him $5, $10 every month, whether they're okay with all of this. But it's certainly a weird twist, on the new populism, right? Is that little people get to pay the legal bills of billionaires.
We're not going to review all the cases against Trump, but the classified documents case, the trial date has been set. January 6th, he got a target letter. The investigation is concluding. We're expecting an indictment anytime, any moment now. The election inquiry in Georgia, the investigation is concluding there. So are any of these criminal cases or any of these cases, none of them would preclude Donald Trump from running again, would they?
No. And speaking of flaws, even conviction would not preclude him from taking office. There is no constitutional bar to a convicted felon being the president of the United States, because the founders never imagined that something like this could happen. So it is quite possible. And I've actually, Chris Christie made an interesting point. He said, when we have the debate here in Milwaukee later in August, Donald Trump may well be out on bail on 4 separate felony indictments, 4 separate cases. I think it's not impossible at all that he could come back here to Milwaukee next summer to get the Republican nomination wearing an ankle bracelet. Now think about that.
It's just crazy, isn't it? When you consider all of this. I mean, it's my head is exploding right now. I wanted to ask you, let me see if I have really smart people who listen to these. I just want to see, is the GOP salvageable? Somebody wanted to know.
Well, it's not going to return to its old identity. The hangover from what's happening now is going to last for a very, very long time. But I guess the flip side of this would be that we as a country don't really have an option. We can't just have one sane political party. And if you look at the map, you see the number of states where you're going to have Republican governors or senators or legislatures. And so you're going to have to, at some point, encourage the shrinking sane wing of that party not to simply go away. One of the dangers is that a lot of normal people, a lot of sane people, are just leaving politics. They're leaving the Republican Party. They're being driven out. People like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, who have been driven out. The problem with that is their places are often taken by the crazies, by the extremists, by the militants. And yet, let's face it, states like Idaho and Wyoming are going to be run by Republicans. So it's not just can the Republican Party be salvaged, it's can the sane remnant of the Republican Party be salvaged? And that's a tough question.
What about the No Labels Party and the RFK Jr.'s popularity? Who is that likely going to hurt? Will RFK Jr. siphon votes away from Trump or Biden, in your view? How do you explain his popularity?
Well, I'd explain his popularity, 2 ways. Number one, I mean, some of it just has to do with name recognition. Some people who just remember the Kennedys. That's the least dangerous. The more troubling part is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a loon. I mean, he is a dangerous conspiracy theorist. I mean, he is a reckless actor. And it is certainly a sign of our times that somebody like this is taken seriously. It's an indication of the way in which we have turned our politics into pure entertainment and opened the doors to some of these crackpot ideas. Now, I don't know whether he's going to run as a third party candidate or fourth party candidate. I actually think that he would probably hurt Trump more because he would draw from that conspiracy theorist. I don't think that he's going to have much traction in the Democratic primary. The no labels folks are more problematic, I think, because I understand the appeal. I mean, I come from this. I don't want to be tribal. I don't want to have the same old choices before. I understand why people want to contribute money, why they want to go along with it. But right now, I think the real danger is that the no labels folks will play the role of spoiler. This is going to be a very close election. It shouldn't be a close election. If they siphon off votes from Joe Biden, this could be the scenario that reelects Donald Trump. Donald Trump can't win a majority of the vote. But if he can be elected president with 41% of the vote, that's a real possibility.
And I guess they've been talking about Joe Manchin and John Huntsman as an alternative slate or alternative ticket. Do you think that's likely to happen, or do you think they'll say, we don't want to be spoilers?
Well, I hope they say they don't want to be spoilers. I mean, I hope that's the conclusion they come to, because I think the danger of returning Donald Trump is so great that you don't play around with it. And again, Katie, I mean, I understand the appeal of a third way of something that breaks this particular fever, but 2024 is not that year. 2024 is going to be a year where you can't play around. We're not holding a seminar in how to reform our politics. This is like, the analogy I would use is this is the heart attack, and you bring in the EMTs. You can have the seminar on how to cure cancer later, but right now we have the heart attack, and I'm afraid the no labels folks, which has a lot of money and a lot of people who are making money off of it, are playing a very dangerous game right now.
I want to ask you about Hunter Biden, because, night after night, when you turn on Fox News, it really is about Hunter Biden, his problems, and, whether or not he did more, or there was influence peddling, and if the Biden family benefited financially from some of these deals. You get a very different perspective on the world when you watch Fox News or you read the New York Post. So I guess the question, how do you explain these two parallel universes? I mean, I think I understand, but also how much is this going to continue to help Trump and perhaps cause erosion in Joe Biden's support?
Well, that's an excellent question, because this is not going away. This is going to be a big issue through 2024. Because it's an absolute psychological and political necessity for Republicans to come up with a distraction. How do you deal with the dishonesty and the corruption of Trump and his family? Well, you play the whataboutism card, which is very powerful. You change the subject. If they can convince the American voters that, okay, Trump may be a crook, but everybody's corrupt, everybody's a crook, then what you have done is you've shifted the window. So, like if everybody's corrupt, nobody's corrupt. If everybody's been impeached, then it's no big deal. So the worse it gets for Donald Trump in terms of the indictments, the more pressure there will be to go after Hunter Biden and to impeach Joe Biden. Now, as for Hunter Biden, there's a big cloud of sleaze here. Let's be honest about this. There's a lot of baggage there. And when people hear about it, the amount of money he was making, from China and Ukraine, Romania, whatever, people are looking at him saying you're trading on your name. It's sleazy. But Hunter Biden is not Joe Biden. And so far, there is no evidence linking Joe Biden to any of these deals. If there is, of course, that changes it. But I don't know in American history that anyone's political career has gone down because they had a unfortunate child or brother or sister. And at this point, look, I'm very sympathetic to Joe Biden. as a father who has lost his, one of his children. I mean, he's lost multiple. I mean, he's gone through so much tragedy, and he doesn't want to throw his son under the bus. He loves his son, and so he's being a good father. But at some point, he's going to have to, and Democrats are going to have to deal with the fact that Hunter Biden is a real liability, and and again, I expect this is going to be a major issue throughout 2024, because Joe Biden has had this sort of nice guy persona, and if they chip away at that, then they can make sort of a false moral equivalency between him and the Trump crime family. It obviously, hurts him and helps Donald Trump, even if it's based on the big lie that he himself has benefited from the corruption.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very successful at kind of planting these seeds of doubt and either getting people to say a pox on both of their houses, or
that's a win for them,
right? Or kind of thinking, yeah, I mean, all right. I'm just so flummoxed by everything that's going on. I wanted to ask you, just close by asking you about an essay you wrote last week called American Gerontocracy, which I enjoyed reading. It was in response to Mitch McConnell's episode when he froze during a press conference. Again, I thought it was sort of, I don't know what your reaction was when he made a joke about tripping on a sandbag. It did seem, and people criticized me for posting it. And one woman said, why don't you post when Joe Biden trips, or when Joe Biden seems to stumble or say something that is, kind of weird at God save the Queen or whatever he said. And I'm just curious what your reaction was to Mitch McConnell's pretty concerning incident, and the fact that it brings out other people saying, what about Joe Biden?
Well, this is life in a gerontocracy where we have, I may get these ages wrong, 81-year-old Senate Minority Leader, 80-year-old President, 77, 78-year-old challenger. You have Dianne Feinstein in the United States Senate. You have people like Chuck Grassley. I mean, this is a moment where a lot of things are hanging by a thread. And going back to our conversation about this presidential election, when you think about having guys in their 80s, with all of this weight on their shoulder. And I think what I wrote in there was, okay, this is kind of just a reminder that, because everybody's talking about what Mitch McConnell is. This is the end of Mitch McConnell's career. Should he step aside? And then Dianne Feinstein had another moment, within the next couple of days, either for Donald Trump or for Joe Biden, particularly for Joe Biden, though. One stumble, one fall, one 30-second blanking out, and our politics changes, and the presidency get hanged by a thread. And I just think we gotta, I worry about that. I mean, I worry about.
Sorry to interrupt, but you quoted Mike Murphy.
Yeah.
Saying, who I'm friendly with, who's a Republican political consultant, saying that it's time for a good friend of President Biden's to pull him aside. Do you think we've gotten to that point? And if not Joe Biden, who?
Well, I have thought a lot about that, and I almost wrote an article saying the same thing, but that's where I come to is like, so what's the alternative? What is the plan B? And I'm not sure what the plan B is. I'm not sure that Kamala Harris is a stronger candidate than he is in 2024. So I understand the concern. I think it's a legitimate concern, but I don't think that things get better if it is wide open in the primary right now. And again, this is another reason to be concerned about Donald Trump. It's not as if, we can talk about Joe Biden's record in his presidency, but we're living in a political era in which people's appearance and their personality and the narrative around them is more important than what government program they have authored, and Joe Biden is vulnerable in that respect.
So, before we go, I just wanted to ask you one final question about this so-called gerontocracy. Should there be age limits? I mean, how do you handle sort of people who are this old holding positions of power for so long? Term limits, some kind of mental acuity test? I mean, it doesn't seem fair to have an age limit because people at
Yeah.
different ages have different capabilities. So, what is the solution? Is just waiting for the next generation to fill these shoes? What?
I don't know, because any of those solutions might be perceived to be unfair. But and by the way, this also applies to members of the U.S. Supreme Court, who obviously we've decided that being a Supreme Court justice is like being Pope. The only way you leave is if you die. So I wish I had an answer for you. I've become more sympathetic to the idea of term limits as we watch all of this, particularly in the legislative positions. But I don't know that there's a solution other than to wait for the next generation to come along. But I'm open to every one of those suggestions that you said. I wouldn't rule any of those out.
Well, Charlie, you've been so generous with your time. Again, this is Charlie Sykes, everybody. He is the editor of the Bulwark, and has a great newsletter. How do people sign up for your newsletter? By the way, go to katiecouric.com to sign up for mine. But what about yours, Charlie?
Well, go to thebulwark.com, and you can sign up for all of our newsletters. Find our podcast there. I do a daily podcast as well. And if you want to join our community of the non-crazies, to be able to fight to be a bulwark of democracy, you can also join Bulwark Plus.
All right. Well, Charlie, again, really a pleasure talking to you about all these issues. I don't think we solved anything, but perhaps we've illuminated some of the harsh realities that our country is facing at this moment in time. And I'm grateful to you for helping do that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, take care. Thanks everybody for watching. Bye.